We're on Daf Ayin Hayamid Beis, and we're trying to figure out the sheet of Rebbe. Rebbe says that you can actually roast the Korban Pesach on Gecholim. You don't need an H because Gecholim, coals, have the same status as H. And the Gemara had raised an objection to Rebbe from the Brisa that dealt with the Ktoris, which, as you know, the Kohen Gadol took a machta and he dug into the Torah. And the Torah in that parsha speaks about Gachle Eish. Now, on the one hand, the Torah says Gecholim, and on the other hand, the Torah says Eish. Now, this question about the status of Gecholim is relevant in many different areas of halacha. For example, Korban Pesach, is it called solui? And Rebbe takes the position that yes, it's solui if it's roasted on top of the coals. Another issue is the ktoris. We'll see that the ktoris has to be taken into the machta, and the question is, what is that? Is that solui or not? The third issue is going to be michvah in Nigei Adam. And the Torah says that there's a special category with its own dinim of tsaras that's michvah. And that also is a boil or a burn, and it comes from Eish. So in all these different cases, we have the issue of Gecholim. And we only have one of those where Rebbe took a clear-cut stand, and that's Korban Pesach. And he said that you can roast the Korban Pesach over the coals. The Gemara had raised the question, for example, from the parsha of Tsaras, Michvah, because there, in the case of a person who was burned by Gecholim, the Torah had to add a special pasuk, a special ribui, that it says the word Michvah twice. One is totally redundant, in order to include even Gecholim, a burn that was a result of his contact with hot coals. So from the fact that in Michvah, we needed twice, a separate ribui of twice, in order to include Gecholim, the implication is that when the Torah says Michvah Eish, it does not include Gecholim. We needed the extra ribui in order to include Gecholim. In the case of Tzli Eish in Pesach, we don't have that separate ribui, and yet Rebbe takes the position that Gecholim is considered Tzli. So in order to reconcile this, Rav Chizda was the first answer, and his presentation was based on the fact that there are two types of Gecholim. There's Gecholim shel eitz and Gecholim shel mateches. So whereas the Brisa in the case of Michvah is talking about a Gacheles shel mateches, and in Korban Pesach we're talking about the case of Gecholim. I'll just quickly, I don't want to go back to Rav Chizda because we want to move forward, but Rav Chizda says that Rebbe, when he talks about Gecholim as being valid for Tzli in Korban Pesach, he's talking about Shel Eitz. But in the case of the Mateches, because the Mateches conducts heat, the heat comes not from the Eish, but rather from the Gacheles. The Brisa, on the other hand, in the case of Michvah, that was discussing even a burn that he got from a Gachel Shal Mateches. And for that, which is not included in Tzli and Korban Pesach, we need a special rib. That was Rav Chizda on Daf Ayin Hayam and Alf. Now we're up to Ravina, which we started yesterday on Daf Ayin Hayam and Beis. Ravina offers a different structure in the Brisa of Michvah. He rewrites the Brisa. He calls it Broch Vitani. And according to his formulation of the Brisa, we never needed a ribui of michva for the case of gachelis. Gachelis is clearly eish, as we saw in Rebbe Shita. The only ribui we need is for something other than gecholim. For example, remetz. He's got sid and other cases where he had to burn. He put his hand into boiling hot water. He got a 3rd degree burn, a 2nd degree burn. That's where we need a ribui of michva. Now we get to Rava. Rava says that we have a problem in Rebbe, within the context of Rebbe, because of the Torah of Yom Kippur. In that parsha, the Torah says, "V'lokach miloa machta gachale eish me'al hamizbeach." He digs the machna into gachle eish. That's the phrase used in the Torah. And the brisa, and presumably Rebbe would have to accept this brisa. I mean, that's an issue in the Mefarshim, but the brisa says that gachle, the word gachle, before we get to the word eish, if we only had the word gachle, that would indicate that we're talking about gecholim omamos. The average stam gecholim are gecholim that are hot, but they're not burning. There's no fire coming in. And if we only had the word gachle in the phrase gachle eish, we would have excluded what's called lochashos. Lochashos means where the actual fire is coming out of the gecholim. For that, we need the word H, and the extra word H here is coming to include, and here it should have said to include lochashos, but oddly enough, the Brisa says to include chalheves, which if we take literally means he's got some sort of oily substance in the machta, he lights this oil, and the flame shoots up, and he puts the ketores literally on the flame on Eish. Again, before the Gemara addresses the stira lechora in the Brisa itself, there's an internal problem. The Gemara says that if you think you can only use shalheves, because that's H, the Torah had to add the word gachle H to include even gecholim. And here in the Brisa it says to include gecholim lochashos. So there's a stira inherent in the Brisa, as the Gemara points out, because at the beginning of the Brisa it says that gachle includes dafka omamos. And then we're going to say that lochashos is not considered gachalim. And then when it came to Eish, the Brisa says, which it's referring to shalheves, a real pure fire. What happened to lochashos? And then at the end, the Brisa says, well, it says gecholim, gachle eish, and the word gachle eish is coming to include lochashos. That doesn't make any sense. So Rav Sheshes says that we have to restructure this brisa, and if we only had the word gachale, we would include both omamos and lochashos, all gechol. But now the Torah says eish, and the word eish is telling me that you need shalheves. And now we take the word gecholim. So what does the word gachle include? And the word gachle includes dafka lochashos, because lochashos is the most similar to eish. In any event, Rava, based on this analysis of the Brisa, raises the following objection to Rebbe. Rebbe assumes that for tzli and korban Pesach, you can roast the korban Pesach on gecholim. Apparently, any gecholim. Rebbe didn't make any distinction between omamos and lochashos. And yet, this brisa comes to the conclusion that when it says gachle eish, it refers to lochashos, but that's only because of the word gachle. If we only had the word eish, and it only had the word or the phrase solely be'eish, litzlos be'eish, sli eish, then we would have excluded gecholim, even lochashos. So you have to grant me that at the very minimum, Rebbe maintains that gecholim lochashos is considered sli eish, and yet the Brisa says that as far as Ketores is concerned, if we had the word eish, it would only include shalheves. It would not include any kind of gecholim, even the most similar to eish, meaning lochashos. So we see that whenever it says Eish, Gecholim are excluded. And the Torah in the Parsha of Korban Pesach says Tzli Eish. Now, the last thing we did yesterday was Abaye. Abaye tries to defend Rebbe, and he says that this is the way we're going to interpret the Bryce. If we had the word Gachale, we would only include Omamos, because Stam Gecholim are Omamos. We would exclude Lochashos. Now that the Torah adds the word Eish, it's telling you that even Lochashos can be included in the mitzvah of the Machta and Maktoras HaKtoras. Then the Brisa says, I might think that he has two choices. He can either bring the Ktores in the Machta on top of Shalhevis, a real fire, and that's an option. Or he has another option, and that is to bring the Ktores in the Machta on top of Yecholim Lochashos. Because again, we want to make it similar to Eish. The Torah adds the word Gachale to teach you that if you use Gecholim Lochashos, that's also included under the phrase Gachle Eish. And if that be the case, there's no Kash on Rav, on Rebbe from the Brisa, because the Brisa also agrees that Gachle Lochashos, Gecholim Lochashos is considered Eish. So where we got up to is Omar Rabbah. So let's see if we can find a place here on Daf Ayin Heyom and Beis. Omar Rabbah. Now I have my finger on the place. It's about halfway through the Amud. If it helps anybody, the first word in the line is Ha Ketzad. And again, every Gemara is a little bit different, but in my Gemara, it's approximately 10 lines above the beginning of the wide lines at the end. So if you're at the beginning of the wide lines, go up 10 lines. Anyway, we'll find Amar Rabbah. Rabbah is not happy with Abaye because Abaye assumes that in the Havamina of this Brisa, if we only had the phrase Eish, we would have assumed that Eish includes both Gecholim Lochashos and Shalhevis. Now, says Rabbah, well, what exactly do you mean by Shalhevis? Rotza Gacheles Yavi, Rotza Shalhevis Yavi, which was Abaye, that's a quote of Abaye. So he has two choices, either Shalhevis or Gacheles. I don't get it. How could that be two choices? Where's the fire attached to? Shalhevis beglo Gacheles heichi mishkachas. Now, the only way you could imagine a situation of a Gacheles, of a Shalhevis, that's pure Shalhevis and it has no Gacheles, is if you have some sort of film or substance that's oily underneath the Shalhevis. Otherwise, the Shalhevis has to be attached to something. Kigon. Heichim Ishkachas lo Kigon. This shaife means he rubbed it. Lemana. Mana is a kli, it's a reference, it's to the machta here. Mishcha. He used oil and he smeared oil on the bottom of the machta, and then he puts a fire to the oil, and the fire, the Shalhevis, shoots up from the oil. That could not be acceptable for an avodas kohen gadol lifnai v'lifnim on Yom Kippurim. Hahu lamali kro lemuute. Are you telling me that I need the word gachle h? Hashto lifnei melech basav v'damei nosinkin. Talk about Derek Kovid. You would not come in front of a melech, a human king, with a fire that shoots out of oil. How much more so, even without the pasuk of Gachle, that we would exclude Shalheves without Gecholim. Now, we have Omar Rabba, and some have Omar Rava, and that makes a little bit more sense because Ella Omar Rava, meaning Rava rejected Abaye, now he offers an alternative solution. Tritz Hachi. Here's the way we're going to interpret the Brisa of Ktoris, and it's not going to contradict Rebbe. Gachle. If we only had Gachle and not Eish, Yochel, I would think, Omimos velo lochashos. In other words, lochashos is considered Eish, so it's not included under Gachle. And if the Torah demands Gachle, it would refer exclusively to Omimos. Kamalomer Eish. Now the Eish is coming to include even Gecholim lochashos. I Eish Yochel Yavi Mechza Gacheles Umechza Shalheves. Could it be a case where part of the Ktores is being burnt over the Gacheles and part over the Shalheves? Now, in order to understand this, we're going to have to know a little bit more about the avoda of the Ktores. And the Gemara gives us a little bit of a clue. Adi ayel legavai havikula gacheles. Gavai means to go inside, so that when he starts outside of the Kodesh Kodashim and he digs the machta into the Ktoris on the Mizbach Hazav, which is in the Heichal, he hasn't yet entered into the Kodesh Kodashim. So at that point, what he has is kulo gacheles. The Ktores is now completely sitting on gacheles. And if that be the case, he's already covered his bases on the question that we just raised, which is either Rabba or Rava's question about basar v'dam. In other words, this is not in any way undermining the glory of Hashem, of the Melech of Chai v'Kayam, Melech Malchei HaMelachim, if in the initial stage, the fire is the fire of Gechol. What happens? Now, on his way into the Kodesh Kodashim, part of the Gecholim are extinguished, and now he has part Shalheves, Mechza Shalheves. Is now, the question is, would this be a valid avodas haktoris? We've solved the problem of lifnei melech basar v'dam, etc. And we have gacheles, but now by the time he gets to the Kodesh Kodashim, he's only got mechza gacheles. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, "V'lakach melo hamachta gachle eish me'al hamizbeach," which means that mishas lekicha, when he takes it already out of the mizbeach hachitzon, nehevi gecholet. What he needs is that it's gecholet. There should be no shalheves at all, because once there's some part shalheves, then it's not called gecholet. Now, what this means is that if the Torah would have said v'lokach melo hamachta eish me'al gabe mizbeach me'al mizbeach melo machta eish, without the word gachle eish, then I would say, you know what? It doesn't say gachle eish. Let him bring part shalheves and part gechol. But the Torah says v'lokach melo hamachta gachle eish me'al mizbeach. And me'al mizbeach means b'shas lekicha. So when he took it from the mizbeach, it's got to be gachle eish, which means completely gachle eish. So again, in the Havamina, we thought that it shouldn't be enough that at some point it was completely gachle eish, and on his way to the Kodesh Kodashim, he left, part of it became gachle eish and part shalheves. That should be okay. And there's no bittul kvod melech malchei hamloch. Kamash malon, the Torah says v'lokach And when the Torah adds the word gachle in velokach, it means that the lekicha itself from the get-go has to be pure gichol. And finally, Bailahu, the Gemara asks the following question: Omamos be aleph or omamos be ayin? When the Brisa says that you bring the machta with gecholim omamos, what kind of omamos do you have in mind? Omar Rabbi Yitzchak. Let's quote a pasuk in Yechezkel. Arozim lo amamuhu began elokim. In other words, there was an eitz erez, which I think we call an oak tree, and in the Mar Nevuah of Yechezkel, it looked like a gigantic, beautiful tree, and all the other arozim, by comparison, did not have that beautiful yofi. And this was the most beautiful of all the oak trees. And if you look at the word amamuhu, it has an ayin. So gecholim that are considered olamos, it's because it's already dying down. Now, what's the connection between arozim lo amamuhu and gecholim omamos? So it says about the other arozim, other than this one eitz erez, which was gadol v'na, the other arozim were amamu, meaning relative to that one erez gadol v'na, the others were, so this erez, or that group of arozim, were lo amamu. The rest, the balance of the arozim, were amamu. And they were the inferior quality. In other words, they didn't have that same level of aesthetic beauty as the arozim, which were symbolic of the Shechina rebuilding the Beis Hamikdash, the Beis Hashlishi. And when the pasuk wants to tell us that the other arozim did not shine, so to speak, they didn't have the same noi, the same beauty as those arozim, it calls them amamu. And amamu means that it went down a madrega, right? So you had gecholim lo chashos, where the redness of the fire was apparent, and then you had amamos, when it starts extinguishing, and at that point it becomes darker, so it loses that beauty of a fire. And to convey that idea that it lost its original beauty, or it doesn't shine, pardon the pun, it doesn't shine a candle to something that's more beautiful, like lochashos, we call it omamos. And just like Yechezkel used the word omamos with an ayin to indicate an inferior quality that doesn't have the same aesthetic beauty as the most outstanding, beautiful arozim, and the amamos is written with an ayin, so too the lochashos, compared to the amamos, is the superior, like arozim, compared to the inferior arozim, which are gecholim amamos with an I. Okay.
Erez is a cedar.
Say it again, Sammy, a little louder.
Erez is a cedar.
How do you SCEDAR? Oh,
Yeah.
What did I call it? An oak tree?
Oak.
Yeah, sorry. I meant to say a cedar tree. All right, Rabbi, so now we start a Mishnah, and once again, I give you the same introduction that I've been giving you in this parak over and over again. It just amazes me how Sli and Korban Pesach becomes the prototype or the malamed to teach us so many different halachas. It's almost like we're learning a parak not about the Korban Pesach, but we're learning a parak about the laws of Yeridea and of Isa v'Heter, and mixtures and taroves. So by way of introduction, let's set up the following 3 levels of blia. And basically, at least the first two levels, and probably even the third in our context, refer to what we call cham b'cham. So you have two substances, leave out liquids right now, and they're both hot. Like in my mind, I think of sugya of basa b'chol. If you have hot meat and hot cheese, and they touch each other. So we have the following levels. Level number one is called Kidei Klipa, and level number two is called Nitilas Etzva. So Kidei Klipa means that we have to remove, at the point of contact, one thin film of the top. Let's say it's the top of the cheese and the top of the meat, whatever the case might be. If you had nevela, it came in contact with a hot piece of kosher meat. So you, just by point of contact, you would have Kidei Klipa, take out a thin as you can cut it off. Then we have the next level where there's more of a blia, and as a result of a different kind of a blia, we need Kidei Netilas Etzva, or otherwise known as Kidei Netila, as opposed to Kidei Klipa. And there you have to take off a very thick piece of meat, let's say, because there was a blia inside. Now, what happens if we get to the point, this is stage number 3, where there's a blia that penetrates not only the outer layers, but it penetrates into the inner layer of the basa. So you have non-kosher going into kosher, in a case of basar oseach, and we assume that there's a blia through and through, which is called in the Lashon of Shas, mifafea. Mifafea means that the time of the Isser spreads out throughout the entire family. Here's where we get to the third halacha, which is called bittul. Now, what we're going to study in the course of, now, first I want to give my introduction, my big spiel, and I want to tell you that I believe that all these 3 categories are derived from Korban Pesach. That itself is fascinating. But I want to add the following. When we get to level number 3 in our sugya, the level of bittul, then we have to ask ourselves, v'haya, and if there is bittul, what do we do with klipa or kedei netila? Does bittul mean that it's immediately mefafea, the iser spreads out throughout the entire piece of meat in such a way that I don't even need kedei klipa? The iser is completely bata. Or should we say no? Bittul is only going to help me as far as the innards of this basar, of the chatichas basar. It's not going to replace the original first stage concentrated blia that requires kedei klipa, or even more than that, kedei netil. In any event, just as an introduction, just to give you, get your ears attuned to what we're about to learn, all this is dependent upon our mission. Noga becharso shel tanur. So their ovens were made of earthenware, and the ovens got very, very hot. You have the Korban Pesach on a shipud, and it's being roasted by the fire in the oven. But again, you can imagine different kinds of scenarios. It could either be the top of the lamb or the sides of the lamb, or maybe even the bottom of the lamb. But in any event, some part of the korban now rubbed shoulders, so to speak, with the charso shel tanur. And that's a problem. Because charso shel tanur is not called sli. You and I might call it roasting, but it's not sli eish. The Torah requires that the Korban Pesach be roasted by the eish itself. So we have now a serious problem. We've got part of the korban, which now was roasted, but not a halachic sli eish, but rather it was roasted by contact with the sides of the oven, or the top of the oven, or the bottom of the oven. When I say the bottom of the oven, what I mean to say is that, let's say you would, you have let's say according to Rebbe, you have gecholim, or the eish is on the bottom of the oven. It could be that we do what's called garaf. And garaf means that we remove the gecholim or the eish on the bottom of the tanur, but the heat which is trapped inside the oven is still considered tzli eish. But if part of the carbon makes contact with the bottom of the tanur of the what's it called, karso shel tanur, then again there's a certain point of contact with the cheres shel tanur. In this case, on the bottom. That's why I say it's not relevant where this contact is, but wherever that point of contact is, instead of having a tzli situation and that point of contact being roasted by the eish, it's roasted by the cheres of the tanur. Now, at that point, in the contact, we have a certain, I'll use the word, a layer of the Korban Pesach that is possible. It doesn't lend itself to tzli. It's already been roasted, but not through the eish. And we have halacha that kodshim psulim take it out to the Beis HaSreifa. You can't eat it. It's got to be burnt, like pigul, nosar, yotze, whatever the psul might be. So the Mishnah says, Yiklof es mekoma. All he has to do, this is stage number one of the three stages that I described in the introduction, is simply to remove the very thin outer point of contact of, take a knife and cut out that klipa's worth, klipa daka, we'll call it, of the Korban Pesach. Once you've severed that off, take it to the Beis HaSreifa, go burn it, and the rest of the carbon is moved. Okay, now here we have a kasha from the Kreisiu place, Rabbi Yonasan Eibish. He says, I don't understand what's going on here. You're telling me that the klipa is kodshim psulim. He says, I don't get it. Harehi iser gomor. That klipa is aser. It's kodshim psulim. We're not allowed to eat kodshim psulim. It's a cheftzah d'isura, which I say it's like the vela. Now it's very nice that you cut it out. He says, Havi kedevela madua eno choseres v'oseres sabasar asamachlo. It's like a chadgadya over here. Oh, that's a nice pun. Talking about the gedi of the Korban Pesach. There's a chadgadya over here because you're going to take off the kedei klipa, but that kedei klipa already, through the process of tzli, has penetrated its tam into the next kedei klipa. So now you're going to have to take off a second kedei klipa. Madua ena choseres v'oseres zabasar asamachlo kedei klipa. V'yadin shetzarich liklov shtei pa'amin. Now, Rabbi Yonasan Eibishitz is a little bit before Rabbi Kivega. Not much, maybe a half a century. So Rabbi Kivega writes, Kusha Gidola Hi, this is a great kasha. And we're not happy with the answer of the Kreisiu place. He says, B'dochak, he admits it's dochak, yesh lefarish, shemasha omra mishnah yiklov, hainu od klipa, milvada klipa shenoga b'cheres hatan. The Mishnah assumed, upgered, as we say, a pasha, it didn't even have to spell out that you need klipa. When the Mishnah says yiklov, it means the second layer that was infected by the first layer. And tzarich liklov pamayim. And Rabbi Kivega says, Ein achinam, yesh lidchok ulefarish, kemoshe yitzia hakreisi uplesi, shemasha omra mishnah yiklov, hainu klipa nosefes, milvada klipa b'masha noga b'cheres shel kan. So Rabbi say, look, if I tell you I'm not happy, I'm in good company. because both the Crazy and Placey and Rebbe Akiva Eiger could not come up with a better explanation about Mishnah, and they both said it's doch. So I wish I can improve on this. Maybe there's alumnus here to explain why one Kedei Klipa is enough. I don't know. Okay, now we move on to stage number 2. And that's called Notaf Me Rotvo. Now, Rotvo already introduces a liquid substance into the picture, what we call lachluchis. So the Korban Pesach has a certain lachluchis. There are rotevs that come out of the Korban Pesach. And here we have to add a very important Tosfos. Tosfos says that what happens is that this juice now exudes from the Korban Pesach before Tzli. Says Tosfos, if it would have been after the Tzli, now again, I don't know, we have to figure out the shear of Tzli. Let's say it takes, what should I say, 5 minutes until it's Salud. And within those 5 minutes, when these Netifas HaRotev, that Rotev, like the Maga in the ratio between the Korban Pesach and the what's it called, the Charso Shel Cheres, the Charsos Shel Tanur, the Charso Shel Tanur. I have to get that phrase memorized. Charso Shel Tanur. So that rotav, like Charso Shel Tanur, was never salui. And any part of the Korban Pesach that's not salui is possible. And now what happens is notaf mirotfo al hacheres v'chazar elav. You remember as children, we used to play, if you didn't have, let's say you had a tennis racket and a tennis ball, but you didn't have you didn't have a partner to play with. So you used to bang it off the wall and it would rebound. And they had a name for it, maybe, no? Anyway, so here too, what happens with the rotev is a rebound. The rotev hits the tanur, and then it jumps back from the tanur into the Korban Pesach. And that's called the Chazar Elav. Now, again, I don't know if the entire rotev, probably some of the rotev gets sizzled on the spot, but anyway, part of the rotev apparently is Choser Elav. Now, I think there's another implication here in the Mishnah. The Mishnah is saying that the Cheres Shel Tanur is burning hot, so don't expect that the rotev at some point might have cooled off. It didn't have a chance to cool off because it's bouncing off the Cheres Shel Tanur, which is boiling hot, and now it's penetrating into the basar of the Korban Pesach. So you have Kodshim Psulim entering into the Pesach. Is Yitol Es Makomo. Now we're up to stage number 2. We're not talking about Yiklof Es Makomo, but Yitol Es Makomo. This is called Kedei Netila. And Kedei Netila means that there's a more serious penetration of Tam, to the extent to which you have to cut off an etzbah's worth of the basar. The Ein Dai Beklipa. As Rashi says, Dibra Maskal Yitol. Oh, so he quotes here the Meiri, and the Meiri says, Sharotev Nivla Ba'omek HaBasar. I mean, that's a relative term. Omek HaBasar means it's beyond the basar of klipa, that thin film on the outside of the basar, but it's not penetrating through and through like we call it mefafea. It's somewhere in the middle, and that's called kedei netila. Harotav asur kevichu nitzla, when the rotev bounces off the side of the cheres shel tanur, that's not called tzliyesh. So there's no question now that this rotev is completely out of tzliyesh. There's no way, no how that this rotev could be subject or classified as tzliyesh. Why? Because at this point, where is the rotev? The rotev is bouncing off the cheres shel tanur. And as we said before, the cheres shel tanur makes it into tzli, but not tzliyesh. And now bounces back into the Pesach, and it's nivla b'basar Pesach. The Pesach now becomes also machila. How you machshir it? By removing kedei klip. And here we have a kasha of Tosas. Tosas says, I don't understand. We said that when the Pesach comes in contact with the charso shel tanur, it requires kedei klipa. Now, if that be the case, hare yesh bi also kedei klipa rotev. You're telling me that in the Reisha there was a blia of kedei klipa, and that kedei klipa has rotev in it, and therefore it should be nivla b'ovi abasa. Why don't we need kedei netil in the Reisha? And Tosas answers that ein bi oso makom bebasar elama'at rotev. He says that the amount of saturation of liquid in the meat, in the reisha, that meat that came in contact with the cherso shel tanur, is a very limited amount of rotev. Uma'at rotev eno nivla bi omek habas, and therefore you don't need the dainati. Okay, fine. But now we want to ask another kasha. This is really what I wanted to get to for today. And this kasha is asked by two Rishonim, by Tosas and the Rashba. And they each came up with a different answer. We're going to study now a sugya in Chulin Daf Tzadivav Beis of a case of a gedi that was roasted before he took out the chelek. You may recall a similar sugya that we learned together, I think, in Chulin about Gid Anoshe, and that was totally whether Yesh begin b'notzing tam or not. But now we're talking about chelek. He did not remove the chelev from this gedi, and he roasted the gedi whole with the chelev inside. And the Gemara says, Nesar kol agedi. The Gemara's explanation is, Shachelev ha'asur mifafea b'chol agedi. Frektosis, I don't get it. In our Mishnah here in Pesachim, when the rotev, which is a chefta disura because it wasn't solid, penetrates into the meat, all we required was kedei netila. And yet in Chulin Tzadi Zayin, when you took a gedi with the chelev inside the gedi, and since the chelev penetrates throughout the gedi and through the process of roasting, he's got a blias isur, which is mefafea and spreads throughout the gedi, and the whole gedi is awesome. Why not just talk about kedei netila? And we know where the chelev is located. So after we finish the process of tzli, oops, we made a mistake. We didn't take out the chelev. Well, now we'll take off a kedei netila's worth around the chelev. But the Gemara says the whole gedi is awesome. So I want to share with you two answers to this question, Tosas' answer and the Rashba. Tosa says in Chulin Daf Tzadi Vavam Beis Tzadi Zayin, Ein harotev oser es kol haPesach, mishum sherotev eino mefafea v'chelev mefafea. I wish I could take a course in halachic physics because I have no clue what this means. He says that chelev is mefafea and rotev is not mefafea. Keves. Again, I don't know. I don't know how you'd come up with such a thing. I have a feeling that Tosfos himself was forced into this position because he didn't know how to reconcile our Mishnah with the sugya of Hatzola es Hagidi v'chelev imo. He said that's because it's chelev. The Mishnah says with regard to this rotev that was not solely and it bounced back from the charso shel tanur into the Pesach. All you need is container tila. That's because rotev is not mefafeh. To make a long story short, again, I can't explain the difference between chelev and rotev, but I will tell you the following: that the bottom line is that the blias rotev is a concentrated but limited blia. And the maximum amount of blia as it penetrates into the basar of the Pesach is only contained in tila. Chelev, on the other hand, again, I can't explain the physics of it, is mefafeh. So through the process of roasting the gedi, the chelev spreads throughout the entire gedi, and it asses the whole gedi. It's not a limited, restricted blia, it's a total blia. And we have precedents to this in halacha, that sometimes you have a complete blia, sometimes you have less than a complete blia. You might talk about kli rishon, kli sheni. Some say that in kli sheni there's no blia whatsoever. Kli sheni and mevashel. Others say that even in kli sheni it's not bishul, but you still need kedei netila. You could talk about putting something cold onto a hot plate, and the hot plate is either milchik or fleshik, or it's got a bli of iser in it, and you could talk about kedei netila. It's only a minimum amount of blia. And that's what's going on in rotev. We have a limited amount of blia when the rotev bounces back from the chersel shel tanur and penetrates into the basar of the Pesach. But in the case where I would have said, but this is also not lovdish, but I would have said that maybe because the chelev is a natural part of the animal, so therefore once you do the tzli, it spreads throughout the animal. But the rotev, once it left the animal, it becomes an entity of itself. But in any event, that's malarkey. So let's just leave it out. So what we have is Tosfos. Tosfos says a chelev is mefafea and rotev is not. Now we get to the Rashba. As you know, the Rashba wrote a magnum opus on Yoredeya called Torah Habayis. And in its Torah Habayis, he says, Hatam, the reason why Eina Rotev Oser is called a Pesach, it's only Kedei Netila, Hu Mishum Sheyesh BePesach Shir Shel Yoser Mishishim Kedeged HaRotev. Again, a kind of assumption of physics, but again, I have no reason to know. I mean, he's not making a chiluk. He's just telling you that the ratio between the rotev, whatever juices are inside the lamb, and again, this is after hafshata and the hadacha, so we've cleaned out all the other stuff, and we're left with some natural oils or oily meaty substance that is liquid. That's called rotev, and that's the minority. Most of what you have is basar, and not only most, but it's even shishim keneged the rotev. Lu Yitzur, according to the Rashba, you would convince yourself that the rotev was more than one keneged the 60. It was 1.1 keneged the basar. Then the whole thing would be awesome. The Rashba never accepted the principle of Tosfos that rotev eino mefafeh. What do you mean rotev ain't mefafea? Chelev is mefafea and rotev is not? But the answer is that when you talk about rotev, it's got a ratio of less than 1 to 60. It's but. Then he goes on to say, where is it? Oh, okay, I don't find it right now. But anyway, he goes on to say that in the case of chelev, you have a substantial volume of chelev, and it's not batel b'shish. Now the Rashba asks himself a following question. And I hinted at this at the beginning of the Shia today. If you're going to tell me that the reason why the Pesach is mutter as opposed to the Gedi and the Chulin is because there's shishim against the rotev, so why does the Mishnah require Kedei Netila? He says if the Tama rotev is batel in the mixture with the Pesach, so again, if whenever you have bittul, so you eat the whole tarobas. That's what you're allowed to do. He says, "Mikol makom tzarich litol me'apesach kedei netila." The kevan shemakom shebo noda ha'isur nechshav ki'ilu ha'isur omed sham be'en v'lo mefafea ve'eno nivla b'chol ha'basar v'lachen hu asur b'chol ha'basar mutar. So there's something called a makom hanivla in the language of the Rashba, and that's the place where there was contact between the hot rotev and the basar pesach. And he has a very dramatic phrase over here. Nechshav ki'ilu kol ha'isur omed sham be'en. In other words, there's no bittul. So again, both rotev and chelev are mefafea. The luck here is, as we looked at, is that in the Pesach, keneged the rotev, the shisha. In the Gedi, keneged the chelev, there's no shisha. The whole ganze Gedi is awesome. But here we can be mad to the Pesach itself, despite the rotev of Easter, because the shishim in the Pesach against the rotev. But, says the Rashba, it still is a requirement, as the Mishnah establishes, as a result of the rotev of Kedei Netila. Because there's a blia, and it's like any Yotzimidei, don't feel the olam, you'll never get that blia out. EF shel esofto, and you got to do a surgical operation to remove Kedei Netila. Now, it's pashut to my mind why the Rashba did not go with the Tosfos, because to say that rotev is not mefafea, what is this? Some sort of magical gzeras hakosav? Minayin lecha. And therefore, he'd rather assume that there are differences in the ratios. Is there bittul? Is there not? But then I asked myself why Tosfos couldn't figure out the Rashba. And the first answer that occurs to me is that even if you'll justify the heter of the basar pesach in the case of netifas rota because the shishim, then why would the Mishnah insist that we require kedei netila? Meaning, Tosfos could not accept the basic premise of mifafea in the context of our Mishnah, because if you accept mifafea, it means that the rotev spreads throughout the entire basar and now applies shishim, which in and of itself is fine, but why does the Mishnah require kedei netila? And yesh liyashin b'dochak, says the Rashba, though that's not his phrase, he's not going to admit that it's dochak, that there's a concentration of blia of kedei netila before the rotev is mefafea and it spreads throughout the entire basar, and therefore it's batel b'shishim. And in that concentrated area, it becomes awesome. I mean, it's awesome in and of itself, but I mean, even that basar, because it was bolea, the tam of kodshim psulim, meaning of the rotev that bounced off the cheres shel tanur, and it was bolea liola, in a way that we can't get it out. So Tosas never accepted. Either you say it's mefafer or it's not mefafer. Bishlei Malidi says Tosas, I'm going to say that rotev is not mefafer. Okay, it's not mefafer, but it's concentrated in one area, and you need kedei netila. But you're telling me, the Rashba, that it is mefafer, just like chalev is mefafer, and then you're going to tell me it's batel b'shichim. Well, if it's batel b'shichim, why do I need kedei netila? Because mefafer means that it spreads throughout. And in the Rashba's mind, there's no contradiction between A and B. A, that it is mefafer and it's batel, and B, that you still need kedei netila. There's still a concentration of blia on that surface, or a little bit below the surface, because we're talking about kedei netila of the bus. Now the Mishnah continues. Notaf mi rotvo al hasolis. Now I'm not sure if anybody knows the answer to this question. Vosepis solis. No. I'm going to tell you why he mentioned solis as opposed to kemach. But vosepis, I can't imagine the hechatimtza. You know, a lot of what I get stuck on in learning, sometimes I just can't imagine like why it happened. You know, how did this happen? Yesterday we had a sugya. I give a little introduction to Kodshim in the next year. We had a sugya of a person who shechts a carbon l'shem avodah zarah b'shogeg. See, I can understand that he didn't know something about the carbon. You know, it was kosher, it was possible, but that he would check it for the purpose of avodah zarah and b'shogeg. I couldn't figure that out. But honest, I understand. They put a gun to his head. But anyway, so we have a chetimtza where the man is baking his bread, if I understand the Mishnah correctly, simultaneously with the tzliya of the Korban Pesach. Maybe because logs were so expensive in those days. So once you're already, using the fuel to heat up the oven and you're roasting your Korban Pesach, why not put your bread inside there? I don't know. Anyway, what happened is the rotev that bounced off the cheres shel tanur landed on this solis. Now, there's a machlokes why the Mishnah mentions solis. So the Rav Mibartanura, he says that solis is gas as opposed to regular kemachit. I'm not sure why, but that we could check out with probably the ladies in the kitchen will tell us why. But you have very refined flour, it becomes a kind of a thick batter. Hu mishubachas mi chelek dak of kemach. Okay, so now what happens? The Mishnah says yikmotz es mekomo. He's got to dig his hand into the soles, and he's got to remove that part of the soles which received the netef of rotev, so that there's a little bit of this soles around the rotev. So he's got to skim off part of the soles together with the rotev. Now, again, let's go over this. The rotev itself is aser b'achila, and now this rotev, which was kodshim, it was part of the Korban Pesach, but now it was solui shaloi de'ah because it came in contact with the cheres shel tanur, and now the solis itself is bolea the rotev. and you need Kedei Netila. Now, Rashi adds another point here. You're going to have to burn, after he does the Kmitzas Makomo, and he takes out the soles that received the Rotev, he's got to burn it. Why? Because it's Kodshim Psulim. Now, the Mefarshim want to know, why does Rashi wake up over here on the third level of the Mishnah to tell me that you have to burn it? Rashi doesn't say anything about the Reisha, the Ketei Klipa, in the Noga B'charsa Shaltana. Rashi says nothing in the case of Notaf Mirotvo, V'chazar, etc., to require Sreifa. And now, all of a sudden, when he gets to Soles, the third case, he wakes up and Rashi tells us that it has to be burnt. Why is that? Very odd. So the Mefarshim say the following. I'm trying to remember who said it. I think it was the Meiri. In any event, in the first two cases of Kedei Klipa, Kedei Netila, you're talking about the Pesach that has Kedushas Karma. And if the Rotev or part of the Pesach was removed, excluded from the Tzli, that becomes Kodshim Psulim. It was obvious to Rashi, without even having to mention it, that the requirement here, like in any case of Kodshim Psulim, was Sreifa. But in the third case, when it was Notaf al HaSoles, the Soles itself is Chulin. And we were trying to rack our brains to figure out what it was doing in the oven simultaneously with the Pesach. But be that as it may, it's Chulin. So Rashi wants to tell you, this is what I call Iser Nefach Lios, Heter Nefach Lios Iser. Like, let's say, for example, you have three pieces of meat, each one has a third of a kazayas, and 2 out of the 3 are nevela or treifa, and 1/3 is kosher. And now he eats all 3 pieces. So according to one school of thought, the Rishonim, that's called heter nefach lios is. So Rashi wants to tell you that the soles now becomes kodshim. What do you mean it becomes kodshim? Because the soles was bolea, the netef shel Pesach, which bounced off the cheres hatanur, it now has a blia of kodshim psulim, and it becomes like kodshim itself. So even though it's chulin, this is the first case in the Mishnah where we have a blia of chulin, and the solus is chulin. Is kamash one. Rashi wants to tell you chiddush that even though it's chulin, we're still going to require streifa because it has a blia of the netef, which is kodshim psulim. Sacho b'shemen shel truma. Oh, okay. I see it's late. So let's make a note of where we got up to here. We're going to talk about sacho, meaning sicha. He pours shemen on the outside of the korban pesach. Why does he do such a thing? Probably because it adds to the taste, or alternatively, because he wants to make not one mitzvah of achilas pesach, but a second mitzvah of achilas truma. But that only makes sense if the chabura is a chabura of kohanim. Anyway, we'll see tomorrow. I guess it was common that kohanim would get together and join in one single chabura of the korban pesach, maybe because they wanted to add shemen shel truma to the korban pesach. Okay, then. Everyone should have a great day. Thank you so much.